This is Jay Rogers. I'm the director of The Forerunner, and in this video series, I'm looking at the book of Daniel from a preterist perspective, the easy parts and the hard parts. I wrote a book a few years ago called In the Days of These Kings, The Prophecy of Daniel in Preterist Perspective. And then I followed it up with another book that was shorter. It was called The Prophecy of Daniel in Preterist Perspective, the easy parts and the hard parts. So what I'm doing in this video series is I'm going through the prophecies of Daniel chapter by chapter. This is chapter 2, and I'm going to cover the easy parts. So just getting right into this, this is the Daniel chapter 2. And what I did here was I'm using specifically the New King James Version because I like the fact that the New King James uses verse when it gets to the parts of Daniel that are poetic, the actual words of Daniel here and so on, just for an explanation. In my book, I use the King James Version for reasons I won't get into in this video right now, but let's start with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to interpret it as we go. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Let your servants tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered and said, let the king tell the servants his dream, and we will give its interpretation. And the king said, I know for certain you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the time is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason, the king was angry and furious, and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill him. Okay, so this is kind of severe when you read it. Here's a king that says, I want you to interpret my dream. And not only that, but he says, you have to tell me what the dream is. Okay, and then he kills his astrologers and so on. If you remember in Daniel 1, it says that Daniel was actually trained in all of the lore of the Babylonians, but then when he fasted, God made known his wisdom. And so then Daniel comes into the picture later. One thing that I want to cover here real briefly is the transition in Daniel from the Chaldean into Hebrew. The Hebrew into Chaldean. Chapter 1 of Daniel is in Hebrew, and Hebrew is the language of the prophets throughout the Bible. All of the books of the Hebrew Old Testament are in that language. The only it's the same language, the same kind of Hebrew throughout the whole Old Testament. And then the only difference is in Daniel chapters 2 through 7, and then the letters from the king of Persia in the book of Ezra. All right, and I'm going to show you that here. Everything down to verse 4, it says, now the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. And as soon as it says, O king, live forever, right? That is the original language of Daniel, right? The original language of Daniel in the Hebrew manuscripts changes there in the middle of Daniel 4 through 728 to Aramaic. And you can actually see this yourself if you go to an interlinear Bible, and you can actually see the Hebrew and the English together. And Hebrew goes from right to left rather than left to right. So it would say, and spoke the Chaldeans to the king in Aramaic, King, forever live, tell the dream, your servants, and the interpretation we will give. Okay, these are like conjugated verbs here. So you have little, we will give is one word and so on. But right there, if you were to go to the word right before, like for instance, and spoke the Chaldeans to the king in Aramaic, king forever. If you take this word Lamelech to the king, and you go and search this up, you will see, as soon as this loads, that throughout the Bible, that particular word is used in Hebrew. Samuel, Kings, Second Kings, and so on, Chronicles, Nehemiah, and so on. All right. And then, so it's fairly common Hebrew word. It's actually a, let's see. Yeah, to the king. It's a prepositional phrase, but it includes the word king in it. Melech, but then Malka is Chaldean in Aramaic. So the very first word in Aramaic, Malka, okay, you see that in Ezra, and Ezra has the letters from the king of Persia, King Artaxerxes, to the Judeans, or the Judas. I guess you call them the Judeans, the Jews, right, in Jerusalem. And then you see that word a lot in Ezra because it's dealing with the king. And then you see it in Daniel through Daniel chapter 6. And then the rest of Daniel goes back into Hebrew again. So that's, you can search that up yourself. And according to Barnes's notes, then spake the Chaldeans to the king. The Chaldeans spoke in the name of the entire company, and so on. And so the word here is for Aramaic is Aramyt, and in Greek it's Syriac. Right? The word means Aramaean, and the reference is to the language which is known as East Aramaean. And this is a general term embracing the Chaldee, the Syriac, and the languages which were spoken in Mesopotamia. So it was like the common language throughout the East, in other words. Okay. East of Judah, which has now been conquered by the Babylonians. And the Jews, while they were in Babylon, were speaking Chaldean. This was the vernacular tongue of the king and his subjects, and was that in which the Chaldeans would naturally address him. It is referred to here by the author of this book, perhaps to explain the reason why he himself makes use of this language in explaining the dream. The use of this, however, is not confined to the statement of what the magician said, but it is continued to the close of the 7th chapter. And then the language is used as what is commonly called Chaldee, is written in the same character as Hebrew. In other words, the same Hebrew alphabet. And it differs from that as one dialect differs from another. I'll get into this later when we talk about the handwriting on the wall, because there's this interesting thing going on there too. And the Jews did understand Aramaic because it was similar to Hebrew. It would be like today, it would be kind of like Spanish and Portuguese, or Ukrainian and Russian, and the Swedish and Norwegian, or something like that. With a little bit of getting used to it, you can understand it at least. And it takes a little while to be able to speak it, but the two languages are very similar. Okay, so in my book, what I say is that let me just search this up here. One of the supposed difficulties with the prophecy of Daniel is that you have two languages going on here. All right. So, for instance, in the first part of the first chapter of Daniel, you have Hebrew. All right. And then all of a sudden it shifts from there in verse 4 from Hebrew into Chaldean, or Aramaic, what's called Eastern Aramaic. And so Daniel chapters 1 and 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew like the rest of the Old Testament, but Daniel chapter 2 dramatically shifts into Chaldean Aramaic, which was a language spoken by the Babylonians. All right, now there's another difficulty too, which I'll get into another time, which is the after chapter 7, Daniel, not only does he shift into Hebrew, but he begins to refer to himself as I. Up until that point, it's he, the third person, and then all of a sudden, when he gets back into Hebrew again, it's I. All right, so it's interesting. So some people have said, well, that implies two authors. Why two languages? Why the shift in the point of view? All right, so is it two authors or is it one author? And so what I say here is that all things being equal, the simplest explanation is the best one. The Chaldean portions were composed as a narrative record when Daniel was made ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief of the governors over the wise men of Babylon. That's in verse 248, which we'll get to. And then later in chapter 5:29, he says he became the third ruler in the kingdom and finally a well-respected and prosperous man during the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. That's chapter 6, verse 28. So this was a piece of Chaldean literature meant for a Babylonian, Chaldean, and Jewish audience. They could all speak the same language. They're all living together in Babylon. And Babylon was the capital city, and then Chaldea is the region. There was actually a southern portion of Chaldea known as Babylon as well. So the portion was originally composed in Chaldean Aramaic. That was the lingua franca of the Jewish world after the Babylonian captivity. And it was not deemed necessary to translate these portions into Hebrew. Furthermore, there's a more recent analysis that's shown that the Chaldean of Daniel is actually the official Chaldean of that era, and not the Western Aramaic dialect spoken at the time of the Maccabean revolts. And it's not the Aramaic dialect spoken by Jesus and the apostles either. It's a different dialect of it. And one of the reasons that we know that is that when the Septuagint was translated, like the earlier copies of the Septuagint had a very bad translation of Daniel. And that was because the Jews in Alexandria that translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, when they got to that version of Chaldean, they had trouble with it. Or at least that's the theory. And then there was another guy, Theodotion, later on, who came and he studied the language and he did a better version of Daniel. So all of the copies of the Greek Bible, like the Greek Bible used in the Greek Orthodox Church today, and the Greek Bibles that were copied during the time of Constantine, and the different older manuscripts of the Bible have that version of Daniel rather than the older corrupted version. They're all in Greek, but apparently the Jews in Judea at that time and in Alexandria, even though they may have known Hebrew, they had trouble with that version of Aramaic, even though it was spoken language. So that's actually a very good piece of evidence showing that Daniel is actually older than the time of the Maccabees. And I have another video which I'll link to that where I cover all of this, but I want to move on here. Let's get back into the actual text here. And getting back into Daniel 2. Oops, let's go to, I have a million windows open here. Okay, so we got down to verse 12 where the king kills all of the wise men. Remember now that Daniel was instructed not only by the Babylonians, but if we go back to, I'm just going to go back here. I don't want to backtrack too much, but I want to go back to Daniel 1 and just show you the difference here. In Daniel 1, it says that there's a couple of different places where the word wise is used, like wisdom. And Daniel learned wisdom, right? These were young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, all gifted in wisdom. And then later it says that as for these four young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So they were instructed in the language and the literature of the Chaldeans because they had this knowledge and wisdom, and they were quick to understand. But then when they fasted, they were given wisdom by God. In all matters of wisdom and understanding in which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So that's kind of like the setup for Daniel 2. All right, so getting back into Daniel 2. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He urged and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why the decree from the king so urgent or harsh?" Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked, I would say it's pretty harsh. He had all of the wise men killed. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the interpretation. Daniel went to his house, made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. So those were Daniel's friends, the Hebrew children. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this last time, but the word children that's used in Hebrew in in chapter 1 actually means the sons of rather than little children. So they could have been like teenagers or young adults or something like that at the time. A lot of people hear children and they imagine Daniel as like the 7-year-old or something like that, but he was actually probably older. But I'm not going to belabor that point. Children means sons of. They took the sons of the royalty because they were training them to be vassals when they went back to Judah eventually. All right, so that they might seek miracles from God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So he waited. He had his own dream, and he came back, and he said, Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for his wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is the darkness, and light dwells with him." He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. So God knows all secrets, in other words. Interesting phrase here, the times and the seasons. That's used later in Daniel, and it's often misinterpreted. But to be able to change the times and the seasons means you have the power of God. "I thank you and praise you, O God, God of my fathers, that you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand." So there's Daniel's very beautiful prayer in verse. Okay. Then Daniel explains the dream. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation." Then Arioch brought Daniel before the king, and thus to him, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation." There is again there's another version that says sons. So they're the sons of the royalty who were captives in 605. By the way, I forgot to mention this, but this chapter takes place in 606 BC, 605 BC, I believe. I'm going to check that before I do the next one. But the first chapter 1 is 1 year, and this is like the following year or later the next year. So the two go like right back to back with each other. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" The other companions, by the way, up here, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are their Hebrew names, and the others are their Aramaic names. Daniel's name in Hebrew is Daniel, and then his Aramaic name is Belteshazzar. It has the word Bel in it, which is the name of one of their gods. All right. When we get into the Hebrew children in the furnace, I'll go through what their names mean actually in Aramaic. "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals his secrets. and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream, the visions upon your head, the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals his secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Okay. So, one thing I do want to say about this before I read the next part is that Daniel's speaking here to King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's saying to him that, these are actually the secrets, all right? And he mentions that these are going to be things that happen in the latter days. Just looking for that here we go right here, the latter days. And if you want to know what the latter days means, like, does it mean the last days? Does it about eschatology? There's a little parallelism here, okay? This is about what would come to pass after this. So after this, he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. Okay, so what will be after this in latter days mean the same thing. It's very generic. It does not mean like the last days of the end times or something like that. It's just days in the future. That's important for the preterist view, by the way. So here's the interpretation of the dream. O king, you were watching, and behold, a great image whose splendor was excellent stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image of its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the earth, the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Just note those words there. And wherever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the earth, beasts of the field, and birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand, and he has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. Like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made it known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, Truly, your God is the God of gods, Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets. This is interesting too. King of kings, Lord of lords is an allusion that's often used in the New Testament. A revealer of secrets, since you could reveal a secret. And then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts and made him a ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also, Daniel petitioned the king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Interesting that they switched back from, this is Daniel in Hebrew, and this is the names of his friends in Aramaic, right? Daniel is the chief administrator over Babylon, and his 3 Hebrew friends, companions, are also administrators. Okay, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So the gate of the king is the king's court. There's actually I might get into this in this series, but there's actually some real interesting archaeology with Babylon. Babylon is the city, but also the province, and then there were other provinces as well. And that's important when we get into Daniel a little bit later too. All right, then I want to now talk about, hopefully I can add this to the stage here. This is my slideshow for today. All right, the first kingdom that we talked about was Babylon, and it says that this is greater than the other kingdoms. Just keep that in mind as we go through in this. And we know it's Babylon because Daniel says this. He says, you, O king, are a king of kings. All right, you are this head of gold. All right, so that's Babylon. All right, the one that comes after it, that is silver, excuse me. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior of yours. He doesn't mention silver there, but it is silver. We know that from the dream itself. It says chest and arms of silver. The one after it is inferior, and that one is Medo-Persia. You notice that that's larger. The third kingdom is Greece, or what's known as Macedonia, Greece. In other words, Alexander's invasions. And you notice that that goes further east into India. And then finally, the fourth kingdom, the kingdom of iron, is the kingdom of Rome, the Roman Empire, which was, now you might say, wasn't the Roman Empire the strongest? Why is Daniel saying that the other kingdoms are inferior? All right. The point of that is to show that what's coming is the God of heaven and the kingdom of heaven. Okay, the kingdom of heaven crushes the fourth kingdom. All right, this is the head of gold, which is Babylon. Oops. This is the head of gold, which is Babylon. The chest and arms of silver, the belly and call it the torso and thighs of bronze or brass, and then the legs and feet of iron, and the toes mixed with miry clay. And what happens in the days of these kings, the days of the Roman kings, is the God of heaven sends a stone, or a stone cut out of a mountain without hands. It broke the pieces of iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and gold, and it consumes all the kingdoms of the world, right? All the other kingdoms, the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, were crushed. They became like chaff on the summer threshing floors. That's like when you get that image even throughout the whole Bible, the chaff, right? That's what's left over when the wheat is harvested and it's burned up, or the wind carries it away, so no traces are found. And the stone became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. All right. It's important when we interpret Daniel 2 that we also consider Daniel 7, which is the same interpretation, but with different images. And then as we get into Daniel 8, we'll see that Persia and Greece are the kingdoms mentioned there. Daniel 9, we have a timeline from the time of Persia until the time of the Roman kings, again, when Christ comes. And then Daniel 10 through 12, especially 11 and 12, which is where the prophecy begins. We have the Persian kings, Alexander and the kings of the north and south, which is the Greek period, and the abomination, which takes place in the Roman period. So what I'm going to get into next is the difficult parts, which is the Roman Empire. What is meant by in the days of these kings? All right, Daniel 44 and 45 is the stumbling block of Daniel. That's where it gets hard for some people. And here again, I show that, we have 4 world empires in chapter 2, 4 again in chapter 7. You see the shift from Hebrew into Chaldean, which I have in kind of a beige color here, and light blue is Hebrew. Then we have Persia and Greece in chapters 8 and chapters 11. And then we have a middle section which takes us all the way to Rome. And then chapter 11 and 12 brings us to Rome. All right. So that's that. I'm going to come back with my next video, which is going to deal with the hard parts. And I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about how do we know that the iron legs and the feet and the toes that are mixed with miry clay, how do we know that that's Rome and not, the Seleucid period or Rome of the Middle Ages, the papacy, or a rebuilt Roman Empire? That's the stumbling block that people get hung up on. And so until then, this is Jay Rogers. Like and subscribe to my videos. You can order. I really would like you to go to, I forgot to put my banner on, but I'll put this down in the comment section below. Lulu.com /spotlight/Forerunner is the best place to get a good price on the book, or through my website. If you request in your notes a signed copy, I can actually send you a signed copy of the thick book, the 700-page book. So I'm ending the recording, and I'll be back with Daniel 2, verses 44 and 45, the hard parts.